You are listening to Book Clips, a podcast where authors and narrators expose you to excerpts from different books. You can find the show and more by searching for The Lesbian Talk Show on iTunes, Podbean or Stitcher.
Spark by Catherine Friend. Read by Ann Etter. An excerpt from Chapter 8. That evening, after I performed one of Blanche's responsibilities, refilling the Queen's perfume pan with fresh rosewater and cloves, I was so parched I had no choice but to guzzle down 3 mugs of wine. As a result, an unfamiliar warmth quickly spread all the way out to my fingers and toes. Feeling a bit tipsy, I lowered myself onto a cushioned stool in the Queen's private chamber, where other women talked and sewed. While Elizabeth sat reading in her thickly padded velvet chair, I drank in every detail of her face, her dress, and her fingers, pale and straight as rulers. After my visit with Ray, I was convinced. This woman wasn't an actress, but the real Elizabeth Tudor, Queen of England, who would rule for another 43 years. Her navy would explore the globe and defeat the Spanish Armada. She would invite Shakespeare to her palaces to perform his dramas. Her reign would produce such a burst of art, music, and science that history named the period after her, the Elizabethan age. When Lady Charlotte handed me one of the Queen's collars that needed repair, I sputtered something inane while staring at the needle and thread she'd also given me. I had no idea what to do and couldn't even thread the needle to get started. But when my fingers, or rather Blanche's fingers, picked up the needle and spool, they acted of their own accord, folding the end of the thread over the needle, moistening it in my mouth, then slipping the folded part expertly through the eye of the needle. I bit off a gasp as I then tied some sort of knot at the other end of the thread and began to sew. Holy crap! I knew little about the brain, but the part that performed familiar functions must still be under Blanche's control. In this case, it was a relief. But it worried me. How much control did I actually have over this body? If I came across someone who'd been hurt, my instinct was to run toward them. What if Blanche's were to run away from them? Could I stop that? My ignorance ate through me like battery acid. Did this mean that Blanche was in my body using my skills? Painting, texting, navigating the tube system? My thoughts returned to that idea that Blanche was sleeping with Chris. Chris would certainly know it wasn't me, right? As I stared at the threaded needle, the delicious surprise of an unfamiliar action in 1560, feeling natural, reminded me of my first middle school art class, when I'd picked up a paintbrush and a tube of golden cerulean blue. The feeling of sliding the thick paint across the canvas felt so right, I'd gasped. Then I'd picked up some red oxide, some cadmium yellow, and proceeded to turn my sea of cerulean blue into a painting of what you'd see while looking down into a shallow pool of clear water. Lady Blanche. I rose and approached Elizabeth, shuddering over my earlier statements to her, amazed that she hadn't thrown me from the palace on my heavily skirted butt. I was hesitant to try my first curtsy, but Blanche's body took that over as well, for I sank gracefully, then rose back up without a wobble to my ankles or knees. We are wondering if you feel better. How fares the blow to your head? Tongue-tied, I could only mumble that I was fully recovered, but then I found my voice. Your Majesty, Ma'am will do fine. You know that. Ma'am, I wish to humbly beg your pardon for my earlier behavior. I was not myself. Truer words were never spoken. Elizabeth dipped her head. An apology gracefully given is graciously accepted. As I returned to my stool, Elizabeth clapped her hands. We have spent the day being pressured by our councillors to marry and provide the realm with an heir. How sad that we must waste a day on such an inconsequential matter. To shake off the dry words of dusty old men, let us dance. Someone call for the musicians. To the accompaniment of lutes and flutes and a woman's soft soprano, I spent the rest of the evening dancing something called the cinque pas, a dance of 5 steps that I somehow knew. Finally, when I was so exhausted I couldn't keep my eyes open, I asked the Queen's leave and she, flushed from dancing, waved me toward the exit. I gathered Vincent to my chest and retired to my room with the little dog's tail beating happily against my side. Before closing my eyes that night, I made another notch in the table leg. The next day, I walked into the Queen's bedchamber, determined to blend in, so I grabbed her silver brush. "Sit still, ma'am," I scolded her as she squirmed under my vigorous attentions. After brushing the Queen's red gold hair to a sheen, I struggled to pull it up into something resembling her usual look. But soon even the Queen dissolved into laughter, and I had to give up. Lady Clinton, a sharp-faced woman with teeth too large for her mouth, did the hair. Then I pushed my way back in and arranged the headpiece, which was a small crown with 6 long bobs of jewels that rested forward of the crown, lying across her hair as if they'd come down in a gentle rain. "You have done well, my Spark," Elizabeth said as she contemplated her image in the thick, heavy silver mirror. She winked at me. "But it will be quite some time before you do our hair again." I followed Elizabeth and the others into Whitehall Chapel, a square room lined with marble columns and a ceiling that soared at least 2 stories above us. I settled into the nearest box with 3 other women, not wanting to presume that Blanche belonged with the Queen. When we sat on the narrow bench, our skirts filled the box. I watched the service with interest, knowing that the Protestant Elizabeth had already issued many proclamations that reversed her sister Mary's Catholic Reformation. Yet, as I looked around the elaborate gold and white room, it was clear Elizabeth had retained some of her favorite parts of Catholicism. The beauty of the church, the soaring music, and the act of kneeling during parts of the service. Even though no heavy incense clogged the air, the heat of the worshippers crowded into the room made my eyes feel heavy. It might also have been the minister droning on about misguided Catholic beliefs. I distracted myself by thinking of other times I could have visited. Why couldn't I have been transported back to 1890 in Auvers, France, where I could have saved Vincent van Gogh from the gunshot wound that killed him? The romantic version of his death, "Artist in anguish takes his own life," was bullshit. Who shoots himself in the stomach? And the doctor said he'd been shot from a short distance. I lost myself imagining coming to Van Gogh's rescue as he likely confronted the teenager who'd bullied him for months. A jab in my side from Lady Clinton snapped me to attention. "Cease snoring, or the Queen will hear you." I wanted to suggest she try living in the body of another person and see if she wasn't a little worn out. Once the service finally ended, with Cat Ashley's permission and Lady Mary's grumpy help, I put together a small care package for Ray. Wool blanket, feather pillow, sausages, 2 wedges of cheese, and a jug of ale. These I took to the guardhouse, where I knocked and found 3 men. Luckily, one of them was Jacob, whom I beckoned to step outside, which he did. "I'm so happy to find you," I said. When he blushed violently, I smiled to myself. I'd been correct. Sweet Jacob had a crush on Blanche. I explained that Hugh Draper, the man in the Salt Tower, was someone who needed my help and that I'd gathered some things for him. "Would you be so kind as to deliver them for me?" I rested my hand lightly on his chest. "You're the only one I dare trust, especially with this ale." He dragged his gaze from his feet to Blanche's bountiful chest, finally reaching my eyes. I tried not to make a face, as feminism wouldn't take hold in England for at least another 300 years. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Aren't I always?" "You used to snap and scold and command me. I wonder, where is that Lady Blanche?" "She's gone. I don't like her," I said. "Well, I do," he replied. "Fine. You want to be commanded? I'll command. Deliver this package to the tower." I pushed the package at him and left. My next need was to wash my hair. With Vincent at my heels, I strolled through the working parts of the palace grounds and found the laundry. Vats of madly boiling water hung over open flames. If I could get some of that water before the laundress added soap, I could drink it. But I saw no place to take a bath or shower, only rows of servants' dresses hanging in the morning sun. As I walked the garden, I found leaves in the shade that still cupped the morning dew, but the few drops of precious liquid did nothing to quench my thirst. Mild nausea had plagued me all morning, so I suspected I might be dehydrated. By noon, the only place I hadn't explored was the park itself. It wasn't what we'd call a park, but more a thick forest that pressed in against civilization, such as it was. I found a foot trail and followed it into the woods, where the late summer day was just as lovely in the garden. Bright green ferns unfurled at the base of trees. Leaves fluttered softly overhead as the sun filtered down and warmed the top of my head. Some sort of red berries flashed through the underbrush. The path widened until it could easily accommodate 5 or 6 horses across. I listened for any sign of water, but heard nothing through the calls of warblers and jays. I was about to turn around and head back when I flushed hot and began to sweat. I dropped to my knees and vomited in the grass. Not fun. I remained there until I stopped trembling. God, what had I eaten? I managed to get back on my feet despite the 300 pounds of dress. Then noticed that Vincent was sniffing at a narrow opening in a stand of bushes. Was that a trail? If so, it wasn't advertising itself. This has been Ann Etter reading an excerpt from Spark by Catherine Friend. If you'd like me to read for you, you can contact me on Facebook or at cordeliasmom_2000@yahoo.com.
This was an episode of Book Clips. Check out the show notes for more on this book. And it would be great if you would rate the show and subscribe to the Lesbian Talk Show podcast channel for more woman-centered content. If you are an author of lesbian fiction, then send us your reading. You can find out how on the lesbiantalkshow.com/reading.